Hey everyone, what's up? This is Uri from Gorilla Poker, bringing you guys a double high stakes hand history review where you get to see the best of the best playing and yours truly making an attempt at analyzing what's going on. It's a good opportunity for everyone to learn. So let's get into it. So hand number 1 is played at 100, 200 GG network. Ignacio raises to 460 from the button, and Manuel 3-bets to 2,200 from the small blind. Anyone doing math, this is roughly a 5x 3-bet. Anything between 4 and 5x would be, let's say, the recommended sizing in this kind of spot, where the difference, if you're the one raising, is that as your opponent goes smaller, you get to call more and more hands. Whereas when he goes something like 5x, suddenly you should be folding pocket pairs and suited connectors sometimes, etc. But you can also develop a shoving range. So these two strategies are a bit different. Personally, I think that if you also flat from the small blind, 5x makes more sense. If you play 3-bet only, maybe 4x makes a bit more sense. With the logic being that the 5x range is a bit more polar, so it benefits a bit more from fold equity. Whereas the 4x range being more merged doesn't mind getting called as much. It's more of a pushing equity type situation rather than a nuts or air situation. So it makes sense to go smaller, but that's just my heuristics. I think both sizes are fine. So we get a 3-bet and actually a 4-bet from a button, which the small blind calls. And at this point, if you're imagining ranges, the button's range is going to be aces, kings, queens, jacks, ace, king for value, roughly, plus kind of a mix of bluffs, where bluffs come from the offsuit Broadway region and the suited bottom of calling range region. Usually in position, bluffs and 4-bet pots are close to the bottom of the calling range. So if you were to imagine a kind of a grid of calling hands and just take some stuff mixed along the bottom of that and maybe throw in a few ace queens and king queens, and that's going to be your 4-bet bluffing range. So we get a queen 10-3 rainbow board, Manuel checks, and Ignacio c-bets fairly small, and at this point it is worth talking about the board and the dynamics of this board, etc., because it's a special board, right? The second a 4-bet happens, the main hand that should be in your head when analyzing is ace-king, and on queen 10-3, ace-king is 2 overcards plus a gut shot, so a fair amount of equity. As such, this is the kind of board where the out-of-position player can play very aggressively check-raising to deny equity from ace-king, and the in-position player possibly doesn't even bet all of his ace-kings to kind of stop his opponent from denying their equity. And there's often this kind of game being played, if you were to look at a computer simulation, where in-position is betting a certain percent of his ace-kings and out-of-position is check-raising a certain percent of his continue range. And if you were to up the ace-king betting, you'd up the check-raising. If you were to up the check-raising, you'd lower the ace-king betting. So you have these kind of dynamics. Of course, sometimes a queen 10 board is just good enough for the button to bet everything. I'm not sure that's the case here, but maybe. But yeah, we see a check, and Ignacio goes with a bet size that implies he does think he can bet everything. I would be surprised, like I said, because of this ace-king effect, but sometimes if you think about your range and you're like, I have tons of broadways as bluffs, and ace-king has tons of equity, you might be like, okay guys, my range is just super strong, I just get to throw in a bet. I'm not sure, would have to look it up. Intuitively, I would guess you cannot bet absolutely everything, but maybe I'm wrong, and if you do, maybe bigger sizing too. But yeah, check, we see a small bet, and Manuel goes all in, which, like I said, is the play a lot of the time here with your continue range against ace-king, and certainly if your opponent is implying that he's betting his entire range, this play makes a lot of sense. Ignacio calls, and we have a showdown where Manuel has ace-queen off. Kind of perfectly played hand. You always 3-bet, you always call the 4-bet. And then, like we said, check raising is going to be a huge part of the strategy here. King 10 offsuit from Ignacio. one of those bottom of the range 4-bets that I mentioned. In my eyes, and I could be a bit off, it's a bit too low in your range. I think when the 3-bet is 5x, king 10 offsuit does not make the bottom of the range, it's actually below. And this should have been a king jack. But yeah, Ignacio probably knows better than me, and sometimes there are some exploitative reasons for throwing a 4-bet. But yeah, after betting king 10 and facing the check raise all in, you're gonna have kind of a tough decision. So in theory, you're supposed to be indifferent with ace king. That's the main hand. And then you can ask, does king 10 do better or worse than ace king? So with the queen, you'd certainly always call this all in. And, computers always make you indifferent with various parts of your range. And I'd imagine this is another part that's just kind of mixed. Like, you beat king jack and ace jack. All the draws, maybe your opponent is shoving a worse 10 sometimes. But really, not super often. You're not doing brilliant against the draws. It's not a great spot. The main thing going for you is pot odds, which, as you guys can see, even facing ace queen, you have 26%. And, pot's fairly big, so had you c-bet bigger, you'd probably have to go with it. And with this size, have to imagine in a solver it's just mixed, and you just randomize or make an exploitative decision. And yeah, that's a hand. We'll move on to the next one, but maybe take a short look at the analysis to see if I got it right or I was way off. Again, I don't have the exact same ranges, but king 10 off is not making my 4-bet bluffing range. It starts with king jack off, ace 10 off. But these kinds of things are so small, they have negligible effect on your win rate. It's just the principle of, like, if you know the shape, you'd never go with king 10, but maybe exploitative reasons, etc. And yeah, you can see, like we said, this offsuit region and bottom of calling range suited region against the 3-bet. So just running the sim with lots of sizes, and we'll see roughly what's up. Okay, guys, so it does appear like I was kind of correct in that you certainly cannot bet everything in your range. Small sizing is not really a thing you should be using. And like I said, ace king is the mixed hand and kind of the cornerstone of this kind of board. And if you bet small, your opponent, raises big, doesn't have to be all in, but whatever with ace queen. And let's say he were to shove, which never happens here. Of course, it looks like you actually call ace king and you call ace 10, but it's tough to estimate because the shove never happens versus a small bet never happens. So how do you even analyze a spot, and do you even care? So I'd say, if we were sticklers, we would go into the solver and have just the 10% bet, but we're not, right? Because it's not a thing, so who cares? So if you go quarter pot, which is a bet size, which makes more sense for this board because it's a dynamic board. You don't want to bet 10% and your opponent just clicks call with ace jack, right? Want to give him a tough decision. So if you go 25%, here your opponent can shove ace queen, and then your ace king will be mixed and your ace 10 will be mixed, and presumably king 10 is the same. So the principle and the way I was able to figure this out on the fly is always, you have the hands that are going to be plus EV calls, right? Like if someone check shoves here, any queen is calling for you. And ace king is like your main draw, so it's never supposed to be an always call. I know a queen is supposed to be plus EV and the 10 unclear, so unclear in computer versus computer tends to become 0 EV. Kind of a shortcut for you guys to estimate what's going on. And yeah, as I was saying, in computer versus computer, you have these indifferent range parts, and once you understand that, it's easier to make a decision. And spots, for an exploitative reason, for a theoretical reason, but you're not like, oh, what do I do with king 10 against a shove? But more calm, chill, like, oh, queen's plus EV. It's a bit worse, it's probably indifferent. So what do I think of how he plays, and go from there. Okay, so next hand, this is going to be button versus big blind. Button raises to 2200. We're 500, 1K with the ante game, so very, very big. And big blind calls, and we get a jack 4-9 two-tone board. Goes check, check. This is actually a very strong board for the button, and I wouldn't be surprised if he gets to bet very, very often. And yeah, turn 10 of spades. Big blind checks and button fires a big bet, indicating probably a 10 or better, if I had to guess. Plus, you know, you can bluff from anything in the world you want, and big blind makes the call, where here big blind can be bluff catching with a variety of things. And if we go back to our previous hand and we ask what would be plus EV and what would be indifferent, well, if our opponent's probably betting a 10 or better, then with our 10s we are always calling. And then with a naked 9 we would be indifferent, and probably any pair plus draw is plus EV, and you know, kind of straightforward in terms of how to decide what to do. And yeah, calls, river 4 of hearts, so 4 pairs, but button shouldn't have the 4 and big blind shouldn't have the 4 very often. And flush gets there. Flush, again, big blind can't have a 4 with a flush. He could have a 10 with a flush draw, but he shouldn't have many flushes. Button can have flushes. Of course, he can have all the flushes. So yeah, big blind checks, button overbets all in for 2 and a bit x pot, saying, again, I'll always try to think what's the value threshold here, right? So clearly this could be a boat or a flush. Could it be trips? Could it be a straight? How many flushes does big blind actually have? And if you think not too many, maybe you can do this with a straight. Something like king, queen, queen 8, 7, 8. And if you can do those, you can probably go ace 4, but you never have ace 4 because you don't bet it on a turn. Yeah, these are important questions. Suffice to say, I'm sure big blind should be calling flushes. I don't know if he should be calling straights, but he never has straights, so it's a moot point. And yeah, anything below a flush is going to be a bluff catcher. So that's kind of the situation. Big blind tanks and makes the call with a queen 4 of clubs. So looking at queen 4, pre-flop good, flop good, turn, like we said, this is a plus EV check call. You have a pair plus a not open-ender. And river, even though you improve to trips, you have just a bluff catcher unless you think your opponent's crazy enough to somehow shove aces here, which I seriously doubt. But maybe. Like, if you think he shoves aces, it's a snap call. But I don't think he would check back an overpair a lot to begin with, or overbet shove on the river, despite the fact, like we said, we don't have many flushes and we don't have many 4s, but evidently we do. So it's trips, but it's a bluff catcher. So not a trivial call, and you can see that Limitless did go into the tank before calling with it. And button actually shows up with a spicy one. He shows up with a 6-3 of diamonds. So he checked back flop, having no piece of it, and then when his opponent checked twice, he took it as a sign of weakness and fired a huge 2-barrel bluff. Have to give him credit for this. Very, very strong play. Of course, the trick with any play like this is always going to be balance. Like, are you the guy who it's an easy call against, or the guy who it's an always fold against? The guy against whom nobody knows. I don't know this player, so it's tough to say. But, you know, versus double check, putting on some pressure can't be too bad. Okay, guys, we will wrap up here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe to the channel. I will be happy to hear from you guys in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.